Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history for posterity. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and we have a very special guest today who is going to be talking about all of the volunteers that made the 200th anniversary, our bicentennial, in 2014, who made the bicentennial a success. Patty Haskins.
Yes.
Patty, tell us a little bit about who Patty is, what she does, where she was born, and since this is going to be shown in 2064, if you don't mind telling us your age so that they'll know how old you are in 2064.
Well, I'm 65.
You're 65, so
yes.
If you now you're the math teacher, so if you add 50 to 65, what does that make?
115.
115.
I don't think I'll be here.
You never can tell. You never can tell.
Let's see. I was born in Barberton, born and raised there as one of 5 kids.
What was your maiden name?
Buchanan.
Buchanan.
Yes. I have a lot of relatives.
I was going to say
area.
Buchanans are all over the place.
Right. I have a lot of relatives actually through my grandmother on my dad's side, and my grandmother was born in 1890 in Sherman, which, if you're not one of the old timers, you may not know where Sherman is.
Right. Let's identify where Sherman is geographically. It may not be a village at that time.
Sherman is at the intersection of Johnson and Hametown Road.
That is correct.
And it is actually part of Norton now and has been for a long time. But when Grandma was born, it was just a little community there. Actually used to be an airport there at one time.
Oh yes, an airport.
And which has not been there for a long time. But
so about 70 years.
Yes, and my grandmother actually worked in Wadsworth at the Match during World War I. So
really?
Yeah, so she was very excited. I moved here in 1973, and when I got my teaching job in Wadsworth, and I started teaching at the middle school, and I was there for 6 years.
What did you teach?
I taught mathematics, and I taught just about everything. The first 6 years were in the middle school, and then I went to the high school and spent the rest of my career there. I ended up teaching 36 years altogether. Loved it, loved Wadsworth. I've never moved out, raised my family here.
Well, we're pleased about that.
Yes, and
because what you did for the bicentennial, wow, it's just phenomenal.
And I have 2 children. My son lives in Copley, and my daughter lives in West Akron.
Names?
My son's name is Tom. He's married to Ashley. They have 2 of the best-looking grandchildren you ever saw in your life.
Absolutely.
Declan and Liam. They are gorgeous kids.
How old are they?
Declan is 2 and a half.
Spell Declan for us.
D-E-C-L-A-N.
Declan, D-E-C-L-A-N.
Very Irish name, very Irish. And Liam is 5 and a half.
5 and a half. And they'll be watching here, I'm sure, in 2064, so you'll be talking about their 5-year-old Liam, who will be 55 when she watches this program.
When he watches it, right.
Oh,
right.
It's a he.
It's a he, yes,
okay.
yes. So, and then I have a daughter who is a registered nurse, and she's not married. She lives in West Akron, and she works in Cuyahoga Falls as a nurse.
Which hospital?
Well, she's actually at a nursing home right now. So,
oh, really?
Yes, and she's very, very good at that job. So.
Now, you taught in Wadsworth, you retired from Wadsworth,
yeah,
so
exactly,
city schools,
exactly.
Right?
And I was active at the schools. I was president of the WEA.
And tell us what the WEA is.
The Wadsworth Education
Association
for 15 years. And I negotiated contracts for about 20 years. I directed plays, Too Many to Mention.
Too Many to Mention.
For years. And I was in charge of the National Honor Society for like 25 years. And we did the blood drive and, just a lot of little different things like that. So.
That's wonderful. And tell us what you did for the bicentennial.
Well, I was in charge of the volunteers.
Of the volunteers. How many volunteers altogether do you think that there might have been for the entire year?
Boy, that's hard to say. There had to be, there had to be at least 500. At
least that many, because at least one of them had 120.
Actually, for first night, we needed 130 people. Now,
130 for the first night.
Now, this is in addition to, Bob Titus had a committee that worked on the first night event, and each person was assigned a particular venue that they would be in charge of. But then I had to supply the brute force.
The brute force.
To do the work. And I know I needed, when I finally got the final list, it was 130 people. And that was about 2 weeks before the event.
Where on earth did you get these people, and how did you do it?
I beg very well.
You beg well, okay.
Yes.
That's number one. Begging, any force?
No, not really. One of the things that was nice is we would get calls, because we kept putting out notifications that if you wanted to volunteer, they would call downtown to the city, and they would say, I'd like to volunteer.
Whom would they call?
Usually that would go to Kathy Stugmeyer, and she would take a list, and then she'd send
Kathy
me.
Kathy Stugmeyer is who?
And Kathy is the assistant to the mayor, I believe. If I'm not.
No, she's she is the administrative assistant to the service director and assistant service director.
It was Kathy Perchowski. I have to get my I have to get my Kathy's straight.
Kathy Perchowski and Kathy Perchowski, Kathy Bell Perchowski.
Yes.
Is the administrative assistant to the mayor and the safety director.
Right. Okay. I'll get them all straight. I should know, since I'm on city council, I should know all of the officials downtown. Mm-hmm. But she would send me an email, and I'd get the list. One of the biggest problems that I had is I couldn't get volunteers for particular positions until I knew what those positions were.
Right, right.
I mean, we started working in 2011 on this, and I would go to all the executive committee meetings, and then I was part of the events committee that Pam Douglas and originally Sharon Raitt had chaired. And we first had to get the events all decided on what we were going to do. I know we met numerous times just trying to decide what type of events and venues we wanted to have for the Bicentennial. And then once we did that, then people had to be assigned to take charge of those events. Then they had to decide, okay, what were they going to do at those particular events? How many different activities would they have? And it really wasn't until the very end when they knew how many people they would need and what jobs they would have to do. So that's when I have to do things kind of last minute. And you had to be very careful, because people would volunteer, but in many cases they had limitations. There were a number of people that volunteered that said, listen, I'll work, but I have to be sitting down. Or I will work, but I can't be outside. Mm-hmm. So you had to assign the right person to the right job.
Right.
And so when first night came down, I needed 130 people in addition to all of the people that were on the first night committee, as well as the executive committee, and it was quite a few people.
Well, I would imagine so. Did you get on the telephone? Did
I did a lot by phone. I would send out emails, but I found that, and I think this is true all the time, it's a little harder for somebody to turn you down when you call them and talk to them and ask them.
Right, that's true.
In person.
That's right, exactly.
So I would literally go through my phone marathons where I would call people and then try to find out when they were available, at what times, and what jobs they could do, and then get them signed into slots.
Did you have a list? Did people volunteer, say, I'll be glad to volunteer, and then you had a list of people? Or?
It was a mishmash as far as the list was concerned. Now, for example, I had Mike Viverka from the Grace and Truth Church.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Mike had contacted me, and he was a former student. And this was nice, too, because a lot of the people I worked with were former students. Or
now, that's the force that we talked about a little while ago. You begged well, but you also had a little bit of a lever there, the fact that they were students of yours.
Excuse me. Mike had called and said that the church wanted to get involved with volunteers. So I was able to, excuse me, I got something caught in my throat. I was able to get him to he provided like 25 people for me.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. Which was great.
Yeah. You're coughing there. It gives me pause at this point to say that all of the interviews for this series of interviews, there are 20 interviews, all of them are being done during the month of February 2014. And some of them will be into March of 2014. And we have had at this time very, very severe cold weather. As a matter of fact, today the temperature is 7 below zero with a wind chill of about 25 below zero.
Exactly.
And
Just came in from
the fact is that, unfortunately, many people have colds. I have one myself. So if I do a little coughing a little bit, after a while, um, people have to understand that this is what happens in the wintertime. Now, Mike Vaverka sent you some, incidentally, Mike Vaverka goes to the Grace and Truth Church in west of Wadsworth, right
Yes.
by the hospital.
Yes.
Right by the hospital. Wonderful person, and dedicated to a fault in terms of wanting to help people all the time. Mike would be, what now, about 40 years, 45 years
Easily in his 40s, yeah.
old? 40, so.
Because I had him a long time ago in class.
So he'll be 90 years old or so when he watches this, and I hope that he sees it when in 2064.
And if he's around, I'm sure he'll still be volunteering.
He'll
so.
still be volunteering. That's right, exactly. The now you have 25 people from the church. Did the other churches volunteer?
In other events, or they, like for example, Grace Lutheran didn't provide people, but they provided a facility for us to use.
Which is great.
We used Grace Lutheran for a number of things. I know that night of first night we had the
Steel band
in the front, and then in the back, in their community room, they had children's activities, and they brought in these bouncy houses and things. The line to get in there with the kids went from the door outside and around the block. It was extremely well attended. So, so we had that. You know, we also had help with Greg Townsend and Troop 406, I believe it was, from the Boy Scouts.
What church would that be?
Well, that wasn't, and I'm not sure which church they were from.
406 usually is the Catholic church, isn't it?
I didn't think so.
Maybe it's 402?
That might be 402. 406 was not the Catholic church, but I can't remember.
Methodist?
Greg, and I never did find out. I just knew the number of the troop, and I'd contacted him, and we needed people to, the Boy Scouts did patrols for, you know, making sure the streets were clean. They sat around where the food trucks were and picked up things and threw them in the trash cans. They also helped us. I had gotten them, we were passing out, we had a magician at the Strand. And as the kids came in, we handed out popcorn to them. Well, all that popcorn had to be bagged. So the Boy Scouts all got together a few days ahead of time and bagged all the popcorn and then got it down there to be passed out.
Wow.
So they helped
How
out
many
a lot.
bags of popcorn do you think that there might have been?
Oh, there had to be over 1,000 because I know they sold out. The only complaint we had is that we didn't have enough spots for all the kids to get into the Strand and see the show. Yeah, every show was, I mean, I think they ran a show each hour, and every one of them was filled to capacity.
And the reason for that is that the fire marshal made sure that we did not extend the amount of people in a building at a time.
Right.
Right.
And then I had Alex McIlvain, who is a member of the Young Professionals in town.
Right, Dr. Alex McIlvain,
yes, he was
who
a dentist in town.
And I would say that he probably at this time is 27, 28 years old, right?
He's 29.
29, so
yeah.
50 years from now, he'll be about 80 years old or so.
Yeah.
And he'll be around.
But he provided young men to help out at the video game trucks because we needed people outside doing that, which was great. So I had some different groups that I contacted, which seemed to work out well. We also had actually community service people.
Where did you get them, and how did you get them?
Actually, I went through Sharon Ray.
And why was Sharon Ray involved with this?
Sharon worked with the court system and worked with the community service people.
That's right.
As far as signing up their hours. And we brought them in to do much of the heavy work. They had to set up tables, tear tables down. They helped with you know, the Michael Stanley group that was performing. They were over there working. So we needed some young people that were a bit old, you know, could handle some of that work that was being done, and where they didn't have to sit. And they worked out fantastic.
Now, how many men did you get?
I think we had about 12 of them.
Oh, right, and that's good because you need the heavy lifters.
Yeah. Well, you know, the interesting thing was everything was going very smoothly, and about halfway through, Michael Stanley's group was performing, and of course he was a very popular singer and for maybe the generation under me. And I got a phone call saying that I needed workers down at the stage because many of the 40, 50-year-old women were going up on the stage, and we needed to keep them off.
How did you get them? How did you get rid of them?
Well, I sent the community service people down, and they had to stand like on the stairs going up. They had to take the ladies off, and then they had to stand there and block their entrance so they couldn't get up on the stage. It was like a bunch of groupies. So.
Well, that was an added one that you probably weren't considering.
I did not plan on that.
No,
did not plan on that one. So.
Now, already I've been trying to count here, and of course you're the mathematician, but I've been trying to count here, and I think we're already up to 500.
Easily. And you know, the thing was too, a lot of the people didn't volunteer at just one event. For example, and I used the Boy Scouts again for different events. A lot of the people that sold tickets, I know Chuck and Janet Parsons. Chuck is a former superintendent of Wadsworth schools.
As a matter of fact, the administration building at Wadsworth now the Wadsworth schools now is named after Chuck Parsons.
Yes, and I've known Chuck for years because we went to high school together.
Oh, did you really?
Yes, Chuck was in the class ahead of me, and his wife Janet was in the class behind me. So I've known them for quite a long time.
They were both from Barberton then.
And they're both from Barberton, yes. But I know they sold tickets the night of first night. Then they also worked at the community picnic. I know they were working with the booth people, the crafters, and we had people that had to help out the crafters. Then they also help on Founders Day and another job. So a lot of people did more than one turn. And you know, once I found somebody that was willing to volunteer, I used them a lot for different things.
We had one volunteer whom you did not have to call, and that was I, because I had to be at everything since I had the uniform on. And one of these in one of these programs, we're going to have to show a picture of the uniform that I wore.
It was very authentic looking.
Well, it was, except that the authenticity was somewhat smeared because the colors were wrong. General Elijah Wadsworth was obviously in the Revolutionary War, and then the War of 1812. And their uniforms were blue.
I was going to say they were blue.
Blue. And
you had a lot of red on yours.
I had a lot of red, which
Yes.
of course were the British colors. But when I went to tell the person who was at the uniform shop over in Akron, she said, well, no one will know the difference. And I said, oh, yes, there will be people who will know the difference. And there were people who came up to me who told me that I was in the wrong uniform. But it was a pretty uniform, and I was probably just glad that I had it, except it was extremely warm in the summertime, and it was not the least bit warm during cold weather. You said something a minute ago that I guess begets another question just like it. You were not expecting the groupies to go up on the stage.
Right.
So what did you do? Did you have many of these kinds of emergencies, if you would call them emergencies, where you did not have the previous knowledge that it's going to happen? I'm sure that you probably were told maybe 5 minutes before the women went up, and you had to get some people. Is that right?
I got a phone call saying, get somebody over here now.
Right now.
It was one of those things.
Did you have many of those?
I would get some, we need extra people to, help clean up in a particular area. Our biggest problem on first, and I keep talking about first night, and this was just one of the events, I actually was in the Ritzman Pharmacy. And that was my headquarters because I had people coming in every hour and a half, and the times were staggered for different venues, checking in, getting their badges and everything else. So I very honestly got to see very little of first night because I was stuck inside handing things out. One of the problems, though, that we did have is we had made 5,000 buttons, and the buttons had our logo on them for the Bicentennial, and adults needed a button in order to get into the indoor events, such as the steel drum band. Outdoor events, they didn't need one. Well, we sold out of buttons. And
so what did you have to do?
Well, I found one location that hadn't sold out, and so I went there, got some of their buttons and switched them. Jack Ollum went up in his office, and he had some buttons that were seconds that weren't quite attached well. So we brought those down, and so that was kind of a running around doing that. Plus, the stations that were selling kept running out of change that they needed, because I know they were coming into Richmond Pharmacy, which was open, and they were giving them change.
Oh, really?
So that they could actually get out and sell the buttons. So.
Now, you mentioned Jack Ollum. Tell who's Jack Ollum?
Jack Ollum is the director of Downtown Wadsworth.
Right, and also
Oz Productions. And he was one of the three chairs of the Bicentennial, along with Robin Labaugh
right.
and Roger Havens.
Right. What did you do about change then? That wasn't your job, but someone told you that you had to get change. Is that
well,
right?
I think it was Sarah McIlvaine and Steve McIlvaine.
Who are they?
And Sarah's actually a teacher at Wadsworth High School.
And she teaches what?
And she teaches social studies.
History.
And her husband, Steve McIlvaine, is our municipal judge.
Right.
And has been for a number of years.
Father of Alex McIlvaine.
Father of Alex
Dr.
McIlvaine.
That's right.
Yes. And they were going around from station to station collecting money, because we didn't want people having to sit outside or at any of the booths having to hold on to too much change.
Right.
So we got them to get change and then bring it back to the different locations so that they could sell more buttons. And they went well.
Now, the other question that I have that you seem to suggest here, you say that you set up your headquarters, as it were, at Richmond's for first night. Where was your headquarters at all other times?
It depended. Now, at the community picnic, which is in the summer, it was at the Girl Scout house in Memorial Park.
Tell us geographically where the Girl Scout house is, because it may not be there 50 years from now.
Well, it's on the other side of the lake.
Which is the other side? The north side, or the?
It would be it's the north side.
North side.
North side.
North side of the lake, right?
And it's just a small house that the Girl Scouts use for meetings and so forth. And that was kind of Denny and Judy Roth, who I cannot begin to tell you how much work they did. And all of the events that they were involved in.
They will be one of the interviews.
Oh, good. I mean, I can't tell you how much they did. I mean, even as much as for the parade, we had a log cabin float that we had for the Bicentennial.
Who made the log cabin?
Denny did.
Denny did?
Yeah, he pretty much did the whole thing at his house. And now he did have a few paint parties, because I know I went on Saturday mornings. We would go and we would paint, the different slats and things to get it all together. But Dennis did the lion's share of the work.
How big was it?
That float. It was probably 8 by 10.
8 by 10, and where did you have it on a
And it was
wagon?
on a flat, yeah.
On a truck bed, perhaps.
Yeah.
Do you remember who the truck bed person was? How did you get that person?
Dennis drove the truck, actually, for the parade.
And where did he get the truck? I mean,
I don't know if it's
truck?
one, very honestly, I don't know if it was his or...
But you didn't have to get the truck, right?
I did not have to get the truck.
Okay, in
No,
other
I
words,
had to get the volunteers to walk along, and we passed out peanuts.
Peanuts?
Peanuts at the parade.
And
right.
is there a significance about the peanuts?
Well, Roger Havens has this peanut wagon.
Right.
That it shows up at all the Wadsworth events.
He and Jack Ollum made it.
Oh, did they really? I did
it.
not know that. So we thought we wanted something for to be passed out along with the floats and so forth and the cars that were in the blue tip. So they decided on peanuts. So, because I know the Saturday before the blue tip, we all met down at Valley View School. At Franklin School, which is on the south end of town, an elementary school that Roger Havens is principal of. And we packed peanuts into bags.
Weren't you afraid of the peanut allergies?
I thought about that at the time, and we talked about it. Most people, if their child has a peanut allergy,
They won't let them take it.
They won't let them take it.
That's
yeah,
right.
So they're very aware of that. So, because even candies have peanuts in them.
Surely.
So.
Well, who knows what allergies people have?
Right.
So almost anything that you would have, except that that's a very popular allergy for school teachers particularly.
Right.
Of course, I was in education as well, and I guess the word peanuts always is followed by the word allergy.
Right, right. We used to serve peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at the high school, I know, but
Right.
if you were allergic, you just didn't go near them.
Didn't go near them.
But
Now, the big question, and of course there are a lot of big questions when it comes to this, in hours, how many hours a day did you have to be actually focusing on this?
it depended on the event. I mean, it wasn't something that I did steadily. There were days that I spent 8 hours calling and trying to get people lined up, and I would do that for a week right before the event, because you not only had to contact the people and find them and get them in the right slot, but then you had to send a confirmation email to them. And I made sure that whenever I had volunteers, I would call them back and remind them the day before that, hey, we have this event coming up.
That's a big job. Did you have any help?
No, not really. Well, what happened was originally, in 2011, when I was asked to do this, we had a meeting at Grace Lutheran, and people signed up for the volunteer committee. We didn't need them and didn't need to meet as a group until much later, till it got practically to the end of 2013. Well, by that time, most of the people had kind of dropped off or decided they didn't want to do it. So when I started, I tried to have a volunteer meeting from my original list, and the only two people that showed up were Dennis and Judy Roth. So it was a very small committee. So I just kind of went on it on my own.
Of course, you're not what you would call a wallflower type person.
No, I've never been called that, no.
No. And you have absolutely extraordinary energy, even though 65 is not very old, but you could be resting on your laurels now, but you will probably never do that.
No.
Never.
First year I retired, I thought, I'm not doing anything for a year. I have never been so bored in my entire life.
Well, I retired, let's see, this is now 26 years ago.
And you're still working.
And I work every single day because one of the things that I think that people should know about you is that your organizational skills are legion in Wadsworth. I mean, your teachers voted for you, how many years in a row to represent them?
15.
15 years in a row to represent them. And in addition to your organizational skills, those of us who know you, you also are fearless. And I can imagine that you would have been probably the only person in Wadsworth, or there might have been some other ones, but not too many people, who would have said, well, I can handle this by myself. And that's what you did. So that's hard to do. Let's go to another aspect of your volunteerism, record keeping. What did you do? How did you keep all of these people straight? In a classroom, you have about 25 to 30 to keep straight, and then you do that 4 or 5 times a day. But you know where they sit, you know who's going to be there, you know they have to be there, you know you're 100% in control. But with volunteers, you can't fire them, number one. Number two, there is no way that you have any control over them. What did you do about record keeping and making sure that you said that you call them and all of these kinds of things? Did you have a big long list? Did you have it on your computer? What did you do?
I had a very long list, and I did it that way because I needed to take, I didn't have I couldn't take a laptop into the Girl Scout house and carry it around with me, so I had to write out lists. This is where Kathy Perchowski actually helped me, like with first night. She had typed up made up a sheet that had all of the different locations that I needed people and time slots for them, so I could fill in those time slots as they went along. So that was really nice because that was our biggest event. Now, when we got to the community picnic, I think I needed 40 or 50 people.
Well, I'm surprised to be that few.
It was, well, they had a lot of the things. For example, all the children's games were run by Grace and Truth Church. So I did not have to get more people.
But there were more people.
There were more people. Oh, yes, there were more people. And then actually, Denny and Judy did not have a huge committee. But the people that they had working on them were in charge of some of the events. I know some of the senior citizens were enlisted to help out with the, they had a cake baking contest.
Yes, cake baking, right,
And
pie cake baking.
And they also had some activities, some craft things that were done by that. I got a lot of my help for the community picnic from John Gramuglia and the wrestlers.
And tell us who John Gramuglia is.
John Gramuglia is the journalism and English teacher at Wadsworth High School, has been there for a number of years, and he is an award-winning wrestling coach
Right.
at the high school. His wrestlers we have one of the best wrestling programs in the state, and John and I are good friends, having worked with him. So I contacted John and I said, how many wrestlers can you get me to help out at these events? And when John Gramuglia puts a list out and says, sign it, it gets signed.
That's exactly right.
So, I mean, and that was wonderful.
How many did you get?
I think I had 20-some of the boys that
20?
showed up.
So we have churches now, we have teachers going out and getting people, we have people who volunteered. Where else did you get some people?
Oh, let's see. I already mentioned the Boy Scouts. I mentioned
Boy
the
Scouts,
community service.
Community service.
A lot. My fellow members of council, unfortunately, would.
Oh, that's right. You didn't tell us about your council work.
Yeah.
Tell us about council.
Well, I'm councilman at large and have been. I'm in my second term right now, and I'm running for my third term in November. And I would, for example, in September for the tailgating, I needed 7 people to drive trucks.
And there were 7 people on council.
Well, so, I mean, Ralph Copley's sitting next to me, and I said, Ralph, what are you doing on this date? And got him to do it, and Bob Thurber and Bob Titus, and just simply would ask them, and they would help out. Mm-hmm. So, also people that I knew from, I attend Sacred Heart Church, which is the Catholic church in town on Broad Street. Mm-hmm. And a number of people that I knew from there, for example, Bill and C. Spees, helped me out with a number of events, and they were also working on them as well. So I was able to do that. So, and we also picked up people just from different clubs, from members of the women's club.
What about the service clubs, Lions, Rotary, and Kiwanis?
And we would pass lists around and try to get them. A lot of them, the interesting thing, they're all the same people when you start.
Yeah, that's true.
So
they're all busy people, but they're all busy.
They're all busy
that's
people.
Right.
And again, it was, you had to match up, the job with the person. Mm-hmm. And then some things like, for example, the women's club wanted to be part of the Bicentennial, and Fran Hammerly had the idea to, as part of our spring banquet, to have a...
Which spring banquet?
The Women's Club Spring Banquet.
Okay.
We have it every May. And she said, as our program, why don't we have the Great Women of Wadsworth? And so I thought, great idea. Well, I just happened to be in charge of the luncheon, so I arranged the luncheon and got the tickets, and we sold them to the public, which we normally do not do. And then Fran got the people, some from women's clubs, some from other organizations, to speak, and actually I was one of the presenters at the program. And we had a wonderful program in May. And we did the program in, I think it was August, for the Historical Society.
Right. We're going to be interviewing Fran for this, as well as some
the Bicentennial Ball she worked on.
Yeah, that's right. And also the ball, who was the chair of the ball, Kay Bowman.
Kay Bowman.
Kay Bowman, right. We're going to interview her, and also Nancy Houck, who was the
Tees.
with the T's. That's
Yes.
When I say T's, T-E-A-S.
Yes.
Not golf tees, but this is T-E-A-S. Right. We're going to interview all of those people, so the people in 2064 will have a full array of everything that we did. But the one that they're going to be all looking for, Patty, is how do we get that many volunteers? Now, you have given us a tremendous amount of background here. Let's review just one more time. Since we're both teachers, we always have to review. you've got Boy Scouts, churches, teachers who forced their kids into it, and the service groups. What am I forgetting?
Well, we talked the wrestlers, and then we actually had a Girl Scout troop that
Girl Scout
existed.
troops, okay.
And
Your council people.
council people, right?
Yeah. So that's 7 right there, 7 different groups, and they're going to be in 2064. They're going to say, "Oh yeah, that's right. We can get those kinds of people." One of the other aspects of the administration of this thing, did you have anyone who said, "Yes, I will be there," and then didn't show up? I'm sure that happened.
1 or 2 people, and when they did, they called and left me a message.
Really?
That was it. Yeah, people showed up.
Well, that is wonderful.
I mean, it was fantastic. But again, I think that you need to follow up with people. You need to remind them the day before so they don't forget.
That's right.
I also tried to make their shifts short so that, for example, if you worked on first night, the longest you had to work was an hour and a half. So you could still attend all of the events and you really didn't miss anything, but you also helped out. And we did that. We had 1 or 2 hour, we had 2-hour shifts when we worked at the picnic, which they could still then see everything that was going on, which made it nice.
Did you have any need for someone with specific skills, like computer skills or something like that?
No, I did not.
So all of these people were kind of grunt people, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, it's a pejorative word maybe, but it is exactly what we needed.
Yeah. Well, and the people that actually were on the committees for the different things, they were the ones that were doing the calling and, arranging for the crafters to show up, signing the contracts with the crafters. So, I mean, we had a lot of volunteers that were doing those kinds of things.
Did you use WCTV in any way?
As far as obtaining volunteers, I think there were a couple of times when we had notifications out, and it was on the webpage that Joanna had set up, that if you needed volunteers, this is who to contact. I mean, WCTV, we are so blessed to have this station.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There was a question
here in
about
town.
That. What about your telephone? Did you have a telephone with you all the time, and was that the cell phone?
Yes.
And was that the phone that they called each time that you wanted?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's
so
what
that
we
was
did.
with you all of the time.
It had to be.
How'd
yes.
you keep your battery up?
It was interesting. Mine will go a good 24 hours.
It'll go 24 hours?
Yeah. So that worked out fine. I know, for example, on first night, because that event was the one that was the most spread out and had the most individual things to do. And I know Titus had given us a list of the chairs of each venue and with the phone numbers, so you knew who to call and so forth. And they all had my phone numbers, so if they needed extra people or somebody wouldn't have shown up, they could have called me and say, where are they?
When the whole thing was over in December of 2014, and you no longer had to do this, did you have somewhat of a
it was relief, actually.
It was relief, really?
Yeah, it was. I was just glad I didn't have another event. It's mixed feelings because everything was so exciting. All of the events were exciting. It was a great year, and you're really sorry to see the year end. But it was also nice knowing that you didn't have to spend the time begging people to work again, too.
And that's exactly what you had to do, was sort of beg them to work.
Yeah, yeah.
Were there any interesting conversations you had with people? Now, certainly we had some people, I can't stand up, I have to work inside, I have to be away from dust and so forth. Was there anything extraordinarily different?
No, it was mostly that. It was funny because people would sign up to work at an outside venue and then would call me and say, I can't be outside. Well, you signed up to sell tickets outside. It's a little tough to put you inside when you're supposed to be outside. There were people that I had to get chairs for, some of my parking lot people. I made sure that they had chairs to sit down because I didn't want them to stand for 2 hours.
Where'd you get the chairs?
We would take them out of the pavilion at the picnic and then we'd take them up to the different parking areas.
Why? Where did we get the chairs to begin with in the pavilion?
I don't know.
We're going to have to ask that to somebody, because one of the big problems that we have is we have to have a lot of chairs. I mean a lot of chairs.
Oh, yeah.
And I suspect that somebody on one of the committees was responsible for getting chairs. I would say there are probably as many as 400 or 500 chairs.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know that we had the evening of the Blue Tip Festival. There were family members of the former queens,
Right.
that wanted to be seated in the gazebo to watch the parade because they couldn't stand on the sides. So, I mean, this was literally the night before. And I had to find someone to go up to Jack Ollum's office, which is in the top floor of the, I still call it the Citizens Bank building.
First Merit Bank building.
First Merit Bank.
What, the bank building on the corner of College and Main.
Right. And they would, and actually a friend of mine, that was another friend of mine, I got her sons to go up and get the chairs, and they had to bring like 20 chairs down and set them up in the gazebo, and then when the parade was over, had to return those chairs. I think they also got chairs from the schools, if I'm not mistaken.
Many, many years ago, we used to get chairs from funeral homes, but now the funeral homes have such elaborate chairs,
right,
that they really don't seem to fit on the outside. They used to be folding chairs, wooden folding chairs, but they can no longer do that. I think that would be one of the things that we ought to recommend then to the 2064 people, to be sure that they can find a good location for a lot of chairs, because you're going to need probably 400 to 500 chairs throughout the entire year. And they're expensive if you have to rent them. Right. And maybe there's an organization that would let you have them. The schools, one of them, good places would be the schools. Of course, you know, by 2064, maybe kids won't even go to school anymore. They'll be home with their computers and things like that. But
I know we had for the tailgating party, not only I had to get the drivers, but then we had to have chairs, and I think we had 4 chairs in the back of each truck, and that was to hold the former homecoming queens. And we did get those out of OJ Work. Well, actually, probably from the cafeteria.
From the cafeteria in the middle, in the Central Intermediate School.
Exactly.
So we got chairs. That's an output. There's a good source for chairs, maybe. That would be the school cafeterias.
Right, and I believe that for Founders Day, because the first evening when they presented all of the residents of town who were descendants of our founding families, those chairs, I believe, came out of Central. So,
did they?
Yes.
Now we had about 70 people for that.
Exactly, and they needed quite a few chairs for that.
And we had a lot of chairs, and then we had the people sitting in the audience, and there were about 300 chairs there, or 300 people there. I was on the stage, and I could see, as far back as I could see, people were sitting. Now that was in the parking lot, which is on the east side of the buildings which now face Main or High Street, on the north side of the East Park. Now I hope that somebody can figure that out, but anyway, it's in the northeast quadrant of Wadsworth.
Behind the old Brenneman building.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have there's a big parking lot there. The parking lot was completely filled with people. And I would say about 300, at least 300. And then we had, so somewhere close to 400 chairs were required at that time. So people in 2064, they're going to have to be, they have to understand that chairs is very, very important, particularly for the types of people who come to these, and many of them are children, but a lot of old people, many, many, many old people, and they can't walk and they can't. Now the other thing that we probably ought to recommend is that the toilet facilities are extremely important, particularly for the old people. And you can't have porta potties. Well, maybe you can have porta potties, but typically you have to find places for people to go to the bathroom. did you have to, as the coordinator of the, or the chair, whichever you want to call yourself, of the volunteers, did you have to provide places for people to use the restrooms?
No, the individual chairs of the events provided them. For example, at Memorial Park, they brought in quite a few of them. For first night, they brought in the porta-johns. Now, many of the, when it was downtown, those businesses were all open. So if you could get into one, you could go in and use their restrooms. So the only problem was
you couldn't get in.
You couldn't get in.
I walked from the south part, the south end of the square, all the way to the north end of the square, and I had to force myself into the last store.
I know. I think we heard from Domino's afterwards, which is a pizza place downtown, and that was the biggest night they'd ever had. I think they sold more than they normally do in a month that evening.
That evening.
Right, and some people were calling in for orders, that lived somewhere else in town and weren't downtown, and they had to tell them they'd have to wait till like midnight to get a pizza because they were too busy just servicing the people that were there trying to get something to eat.
I don't know how on earth they made all those pizzas with.
It was tremendous. All of the restaurants did. All of the food, the food trucks, everything. I mean, Swenson's truck, I remember, I went out and got a hamburger as soon as they pulled up because I was hungry. And I knew I was going to have a long evening. A line formed, and when the entire event was over, there was still a line down the block trying to get burgers.
They had, my understanding is that they had to go back to their headquarters or one
Twice.
of the other stores twice to get more supplies because they sold out. So we had, I think that we had about 7,000 people.
I think that's a good guess.
About 7,000 people at the first night. A cold, 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 cold night. But people stayed and they did a...
I didn't mind, because I don't mind the cold that much, but it was 40s, low 40s. But considering the fact that it had been snowing 3 days before, I thought, this is pretty good.
Yeah, it was.
And very honestly, with as cold as it's been here this entire month, 40 sounds tropical.
Oh, yeah, tropical is right. It's been down to close to zero for several days and below zero. Today's below zero, for instance.
Exactly. 7
below zero. And with the wind chill of, I think they said 25 below zero.
15 to 25 below, depending.
Patty, one of the things that always comes up with this is, particularly with a person who's retired, did you have any opportunity at all to have a break? Like, did you go on vacation? Did you go visit your kids? Did you do anything at all from March of 2014 until the end?
I didn't go anywhere. I spent a lot of time with my grandkids, and but they're local, so no, because you'd no more finish one event and you'd have another one. I mean, we had an event every month, so and I never quite knew until the very end how many people I would need and how much work I was going to have to put into that event. Plus, as the events went on, it became more difficult to get people to volunteer.
Well, surely, yeah.
I think in some cases people had volunteered for 3 or 4 events, and they just kind of wanted to, in some cases, just enjoy the event.
Well, of course. Yeah.
And not work, which is perfectly understandable. So it was a little more difficult towards the end to get volunteers.
I've been with the Historical Society for many years, and one of the things that I look for almost every year is for the want of a better word, the recognition of the anniversary of the founding of that city. Let's take Barberton, for instance, 1895. I think it was something like that. And on their 100th anniversary, I wanted to see what they would do because I knew that our 200th anniversary was coming up in 2014. To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe that absolutely any community within 50 or 60 or 70 miles from here had as many activities as we did for our 200th anniversary.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've had, I think Cuyahoga Falls had a 200th the year before ours.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they might have had a week, but that was it.
A week.
A week.
We went for 9 full months.
Exactly. And there was at least one, if not more than one event every month.
And they were big events.
Big events, and they were multi-day events.
Yes, the picnic was three full days.
Right.
The
Founders Day was...
Founders Day was 3 days, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, they had 2 evenings and, yeah, like 3 days.
About 3 days altogether. And
first night was only one night, but it was
huge.
Phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. Just huge. Just absolutely huge. And I was when I interviewed Bob Titus for this, the first thing that I said was that he had to be absolutely petrified because he did not know whether it was going to be one person there or a million people there, whatever. He had to be concerned about the weather. This is the first time in 200 years that we had ever tried anything like this. So he said, that's true, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. And I can understand that.
You know, when we first came up with the idea of first night, when we talked about it, we didn't want to do it as competition with first night in Akron,
right,
which they do for New Year's Eve. Plus we thought, you know, the weather would be lousy. So we thought, well, we'll tie it into that founding day of Wadsworth.
Which is 15th of March.
15th of March. Weather will be great by then.
1814.
Right,
yep.
so.
Yeah, it surely was great. Well, actually, it was great.
Compared to what it had
cold.
been, it was great.
Cold, but it was great.
Yes.
Yeah. And even though the temperature was in the 40s, I mean, the previous days were so cold that the ground was still cold and the air didn't seem to warm up yet. So it was...
The weather was really... We were very lucky with the weather. There were a few... events. The tea at the Johnson House it had rained all day.
Oh, it was just a mess.
It was a mess, and I know that I had to get people to clean up afterwards. I had to take all the tables down and put the chairs up, and I had to get all the the tablecloths off of the tables that were set up outside. And actually ended up doing that myself, and I was covered in mud up to my knees by the time I got done. Doing that. And then for the community picnic, Friday night was beautiful. We did have rain on Saturday
afternoon, late afternoon.
Late afternoon, and they did have to cancel one of the concerts that was scheduled for outside due to the weather. But, you know, if that's the only time you have a problem,
right,
you're in good shape.
Did you have anything to do in terms of getting volunteers for the fireworks?
No, and that was handled totally by the fire department. We had the only thing we really had to do with, and the events committee, when we decided we wanted to have fireworks, that was that type of thing. But that was all set up for us. It was, you actually contract with these companies that come in and do it.
That's something that you would not want to volunteer to be touching anyway.
Oh, absolutely not. And we did make the decision to move the fireworks for first night into the cemetery, right? And as opposed to at Memorial Park, right? And we continue to do that for the 4th of July, but that worked out great.
I wonder if that's going to be, from now on, whether it's going to be the place where we will actually have our fireworks in the future.
I think that's what they're planning on.
Is that what they're planning on? Because
one of the problems they're having at Memorial Park is that those trees have gotten, I remember when I was a kid, and you could see from here to, the tree level was getting higher and higher and higher. So they were at the point where they needed to start looking for someplace else. And it turned out so well at first night, they decided to do this for the 4th of July. And then they were able to bring in the food trucks. There was plenty of parking for everybody. Worked out really quite nicely.
Well, pardon me. When you took one look at, let's say, the picnic, which was so vast, it covered probably a mile?
Oh, easily.
From one end to the other, at least
easily,
a mile.
Because we tried to use the entire park.
The entire park.
Yeah.
And I know that we were way in the far east or west end, and I walked all the way across to the far east end where they had the cars, the old cars and so
Oh,
forth.
and they were tearing them apart, yeah.
Tearing them apart way, 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 way over. And I walked very slowly because it was a very hot day that day. And I think that was probably a good mile, that whole
easily,
distance. And
yes.
then I had to walk back, of course. But I walked all the way over there, and I can just picture you as the person who was in charge of all of these volunteers. And I probably counted, well, I didn't count any, but you could just see so many people. There had to be 100 people volunteered that day, didn't they?
Probably, altogether.
At least 100, or even
Oh, yeah,
more than 100.
easily when you consider all the, yeah, at
Yeah,
least.
more than 100 people. When you looked over that and you saw all of those people working and everything was going well, did you have any kind of an elation, a feeling of elation, knowing that, wow, this is great?
I was always thrilled at all the events. I mean, it's one of those you just sit back and you go, I can't believe this was
Right.
pulled off. And it was fortunately because we had such good people working on those events.
Well, the whole city had a lot of energy, and the people in the city had a lot of energy. They came forward, and I think they really appreciated the fact that there were so many people organizing this and so many people working on it, and they took advantage of it. But I can imagine a person who was in charge of the volunteers thinking to herself, and in this case it's to her, thinking to yourself, wow, they're out there, they're not getting paid, and all we did was to ask them. And that had to give you some kind of a feeling other than, thrilled.
You know, that's Wadsworth.
Yeah.
You know, that is the citizen of Wadsworth who loves this town and is willing to work and do things to make the town a better place.
You know, I did the history of Wadsworth on two of the books that I wrote. And
Yes, I have them. Yes.
One of the things that I made sure of when I wrote the histories was to put in the celebrations. The first celebration had to be postponed for 10 years because the Civil War was on. The second one was the 100th anniversary, and the World War I was on. So they didn't have any celebrations until 1939. And now we are at the end of our hour, and we want to say thank you, Patty, for everything that you did. You helped make the 200th anniversary of Wadsworth a success because you're a good beggar.
Thank you, Caesar.